racism. But if evolution is true, isn't that how we became human, by being racist, right? Like we stayed away from Neanderthals and other, let's say, not human.
Neanderthals.
Well, given the fact that there was a bunch of inbreeding between Neanderthals and, I mean,
we didn't hate them that much.
I mean, apparently, well, no. Apparently, there were some woke people back then too, and there were some folks that run around the activated area, being activists for inclusivity between all people groups. So, there was some mixed breeding that went down.
I understand what you're. You're saying, but I'm saying to become more human, you had to stay away from Neanderthal.
Oh yeah, humans are very tribal, no doubt about that. And so you kind of get what we would call racism today as kind of in some way biologically evident from our ancestral past, but also understand these people were close enough together that we could talk to them like we're talking to each other now. So like although Neanderthal is kind of distinct from Homo sapien, these people were still very much human beings, and therefore they could actually come into our tribes. We could come into theirs.
Well, I think the point that Slavic was trying to make, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that this ideology, like eugenics, for example, eugenics would be something that would be consistent with a Darwinian ideology, because as you have these superior groups emerging, you would want to remove the inferior groups for the betterment of society, right? That was the whole idea behind eugenics.
Exactly the same point I'm saying is that if you believe in evolution, racism isn't bad or it's not evil. It's just another.
Well, again, not necessarily. I also affirm evolution, and I am simultaneously a pious Christian at the same point. point. So what I would say there is that evolution is the world as it is without God, without God's goodness. Okay, it is a very miserable, dark, cruel place. And so what is true about the world is that the strong absolutely have a right to dominate the weak. That's what we see in nature. That's certainly how the Romans and Greeks saw themselves. That's how the Nazis saw themselves.
Yeah, but
There's
the
some, hold
atheistic
on.
evolutionary paradigm would be the same. It would be a world where this God uses.
Exactly the
Yeah.
same point I'm saying is that if you believe in evolution, racism isn't bad or it's not evil. You know,
No,
it's just
again,
another.
well, again, not necessarily. I also affirm evolution, and I am simultaneously a pious Christian at the same point. So what I would say there is that evolution is the world as it is without God, without God's goodness. Okay, it is a very miserable, dark, cruel place. And so what is true about the world is that the strong absolutely have a right to dominate the weak. That's what we see in nature. That's certainly how the Romans and Greeks saw themselves. That's how the Nazis saw themselves.
Yeah, but the
There's some, hold
atheistic
on.
evolutionary paradigm would be the same. It would be a world where this God uses a system of death to create life. And so it would be no different. You
Well,
have this long history of this death machine. God created a death machine because he couldn't
here's
get
the
it
thing,
right the
Sam.
first time.
You're kind of
Humans can take
inconsistent
any
there.
idea. Theology and make it into something
And
evil.
here's the issue, Sam. You're very inconsistent there, I would argue, because
Okay.
what you worship a God that actively allowed death into his creation. Okay,
But he didn't
so
create death.
no,
He didn't create
he
a
didn't
death
have to.
machine.
He
He
genuinely
created
didn't have
man
to.
that was made in the image of
By the
God, and
mere
then
act
man
of
sinned, and
allowing
then the
death
man fell under
is
the
problematic
curse.
in and of itself for your position, Sam. The
No,
mere fact
no,
that he
it's
allowed it is
no.
problematic.
Yeah, well, no, it's not. See, because I don't personally hold to like a hard Calvinistic position where God uses death as a tool. See,
Neither do
death
I.
is a result of people disobeying God. That is
Correct.
part of the curse of man. So your position would be God saying, "Hey, look, I can't create man first. I'm going to create this machine, this death machine, and I'm going to run these organisms through it until I achieve man, like a chef putting toppings on a pizza and sending it through the oven."
Well, here's the issue, because like what the position you have, you're not distinguishing what kind of what the type of death that's going on, because when you read the very first chapter of Genesis, it's abundantly clear death was always part of God's plan. Like for instance, when he tells the first human beings he creates to
Are you a Calvinist?
no, I'm not a Calvinist.
Just
But
for
anyway,
clarification. Yeah.
okay, clarification.
So just for clarification, there's two trains of thoughts, and so one of them you would have death. You would have, you know, So, for example, when Joseph was traded into slavery, right? What did he say? He
Mhm.
said, "What you meant for evil, God
God meant for
used
good."
for good."
Correct.
So there's a big, from my position, there's a difference between God creating this evil act, and on the other hand, you have this free will choice that is made that generates this evil act, and then God takes that evil act and uses it for good. Big difference, and and that difference needs to be acknowledged if you're gonna say that I have the same problem. But that's a tu quo fallacy
No,
anyway,
no.
because
What I mean
my
to say-
position has no bearing on yours.
And what
Right.
and here's what I mean to say. So for one thing, right? Whether or not God created death or not is kind of irrelevant. He actively knew it could exist and allowed it into his creation. But furthermore, what I would say is that death in and of itself is part of God's original creation. Even that's revealed in the first chapter of Genesis. Because what he tells the first human beings is that to subdue the earth. It's a reference to
a
animal
complete
husbandry.
misrepresentation. That's a
Yeah,
complete
so he literally
misrepresentation of
he
what
literally
subduing
says
is.
to take the earth.
Yeah,
and
but that's
subdue
the
it, and
animal. See,
dominate it.
and when God tells man to subdue the earth, he's
Mhm.
telling man that because they are a special creation, different than the animals, we were
Yes.
created differently. Then we
Right.
have dominion over them. So according to
Exactly.
your
And so-
model, that wouldn't be
so
the
what's
case.
what's going
We
on?
would
What's
be the
being
tail end of this
introduced is
death
not
machine, and
death.
then
Specifically,
we
what's
would be
being
the
introduced is human death, not animal. God
No,
doesn't
you're
really. I'm
you
so
have
sorry,
you're-
you've
but God doesn't
completely
really clarify.
Take turns now, guys. Take turns.
but,
Fro. Hey, Fro, you
Fine,
have
fair
completely
enough.
misused what subdue is in Genesis. Plants, they don't have brains. You can't. They're not like a dog or a goat that you can train to be here or be
Genuinely
there.
doesn't matter.
They just grow where they grow because of ground chemistry. So when he says subdue the
Yeah,
earth,
that genuinely
that
doesn't
means
matter.
put the plants where you want them and put the animals where you need them. And that is what subduing is. It's not some form of slavery or guaranteed death or anything else.
Well,
Share my screen, John. Share my
all you
screen.
have to do is simply use the text in a common sense way. You can't really enslave
well, hold on.
the animal.
That's an
Right?
arbitrary
You
statement
can't
right there,
really
because
enslave
I
the
could say,
plant,
hold
right?
on, I could
What's
say the
going
same to
on is
you.
that
I
when it
could say
says
that
to
you're not
subdue,
using
when it
the
says
text in a
it means
common
to
sense.
dominate, right?
Okay,
It's a
boys,
very,
you're talking
very
over each
violent
other,
term.
guys.
It's the same term that is actually
Well,
used.
you're just
Bro.
slapping and running now. You're making rude
Remember,
comments, and I
Am I
don't
on
think you
mute?
need to
Am I
do
on
that.
mute right now? Am I on mute right now? I don't think I'm on mute right now.
No, but when
Okay.
you interrupt me, I genuinely don't care.
Okay, so I'm trying to get this to where we can like stop talking over each other and actually have good back and forth, because nobody can understand anybody that's talking. So let's calm down for a second. Before I let you guys talk again, Jamie, what were you wanting to share?
He mentioned a logical fallacy, and I just was putting the definition up on the screen so people could learn it.
Okay, gotcha. Appreciate that.
Quo que or whatever. It's just like U2 fallacy. So when someone brings an argument and then the response is like, yeah, but you have a similar or same problem as well. It doesn't answer the challenge. It just says you too. Yeah, you too.
What aboutism? That's what they call it now.
Right. Yeah. So that's why I said my position has no bearing on hers. But the only thing that I would ask Fro, and I don't want to talk over either, but when you say a comment such as, oh well, if you just have a common sense reading, it's like, well, wait a minute, why are you going there? I could, that's an arbitrary statement. I could say the same thing to you. I could say, Fro, how come you don't have a common sense reading, right? So it's kind of like a, I don't know,
Well, because
like
I was,
a low blow, right? If you
No, I
want to
don't-
keep it professional, that's fine. Okay. But if you want to just start throwing out reckless comments like that, then it's just going to turn into a dumpster fire. And sometimes that happens.
well, I apologize. That
And
was not
we
my
could do
intention.
that here, maybe. Probably too.
No, that was
I
not
think.
my intention. What I was trying
Okay.
to say is that, like, the word subdue means dominate. There's a very violent connotation to it.
No,
And you can't really be violent to plants.
there is no violent connotation in that. It is literally manage them, subdue them. You're the head of the planet.
No,
Use them for what they're intended for. That has nothing Nothing whatsoever to do with violence.
No,
So
the term there
I think it's
literally
interesting
means
that people can read the
dominate.
same thing and come to different conclusions.
No,
Is this
the
in
term
English text or the
there is
Hebrew?
like every other word in the English language. It's got a particular context based on what the subject matter in the current discussion is. So it's just like the day-age fallacy. Where you go grab the context from somewhere else and illicitly port it into the local conversation. That's what you're doing here, is you're grabbing the meaning from a completely different context and trying to shove it in here where it doesn't belong.
No, it's the dictionary term.
Is
Like,
it,
like
are you guys taking this from like English or the Hebrew, original Hebrew?
original
verbiage?
yeah,
Hebrew.
it doesn't matter. Hey,
Either way, the dictionary doesn't dictate to me how I use words. I use them.
Right, the Hebrews do.
so Fro, let me if you don't mind me asking you a question or two.
Go
Actually
ahead.
a couple of questions. Okay, so do you hold to a literal Adam and Eve?
At the moment, I can't say I do. Now, I can be convinced of a literal Adam and Eve, but I think from the other portions of the whole of Genesis that are clearly meant to be idiomatic and symbolic, I don't see why Adam and Eve should not be symbolic as well.
Well, I think yeah. I think most of us here know how to do like a normal, honest reading of a book. So I understand the difference, and I think most of us understand the difference between what should be, literal or poetic or something like
Not
that.
necessarily, no.
But so in the Ten Commandments, so you reject where God specifically says that, he made man in his image, and
I don't
he made
reject
us in his image. You reject that?
Hold on. No, I don't reject that. But hold on, someone's calling me real quick.
Hey, Slavic, do you believe in free will or predetermined life? Everything's predetermined.
I believe in free will and
Okay, I'm back. Sorry, what was the question again, Sam?
Oh,
makes
yeah.
sense?
So
You know what Molinism is?
So in the Ten Commandments, so if you look at Exodus chapter 20, verse 11, it says, and this is God speaking. Okay, so it says, "For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them,
Sure.
and he rested on the seventh day."
Yes.
So do you reject that?
Yes, for one reason. What's going
Okay.
on there is that this is specifically referring to the Ten Commandments, and the same thing is mentioned in the Ark of the Covenant. So what's going on there? Like you said that I think all we need to do is just read the book to have an honest reading.
There's many references.
I kind of reject that, because here's the reason. The way that you get an honest reading from a book is by understanding the context. And so oftentimes to understand the context, the cultural context of the Near East is what should inform our understanding of the Bible. So
Are you-
so
Wait,
here's the thing.
Can I ask-
Like I'll wait my turn, but I got to say something.
So here's the thing. When God says that he's made the world in 6 days, 6 means something. It's basically the time of temple of a dedication. It's a time of dedication that you use to dedicate something to God. For instance, it took Solomon to build his temple to God in 6 years. It took 6 months to build the Ark of the Covenant, and it also took 6 days for God to build the earth.
Okay, let me make a point real quick.
So hold on, let me finish mine first. So what's going on here is that when God says that he made the world in 6 days, what the cultural context should inform on us is that God had taken the world and made it a temple, not that he had taken the world and made it in 6 literal days. That cultural context is what should inform our understanding of the first chapters of Genesis, and I would argue the whole of the Torah. Go ahead, Rock.
So, a couple quick points. Earlier, you briefly mentioned a Hebrew dictionary as a support for your particular position, but let me point out that you don't have the original Hebrew text of the Old Testament, and you certainly don't have a Hebrew dictionary from ancient Hebrew.
Did the Hebrew text survive or not? Because if you're arguing that the Bible didn't survive and we can't trust it, that's an issue for both of us.
That's not what I said. Let me finish my point here.
What do you mean?
What I said was you don't have the original text. You absolutely don't have an original Hebrew dictionary. All you have is a modern Hebrew dictionary.
So the text was
which has basically got a modern philosophy attached to it. But definitions of words are always user defined anyway. So, so without an ancient Hebrew dictionary to say the word for subdue absolutely means violence, you've basically got modern philosophy as your backup for that, and nothing else.
Okay, so the Bible is corrupted. I wouldn't want to die on that.
Hold on. So Fro, so logically, your position would entail that we can't, and as you said, we cannot hold to a normal, honest reading of the Scripture. Your position entails that you have to hold on. Your position entails that you have to side with arbitrarily, with whichever consensus you feel fits better with what you want to believe. So now you are the final reference point, because when you responded, and I will grant you that you have people on your side where you get your information, and you would call those people scholars. But the way that you said it would be, there was like a hidden premise smuggled in there that only your side comes to that conclusion, that your side is the correct side, or as if this isn't something that's even disputed. Is that your position? That there's a consensus and they're all in agreement, and this isn't even something that's discussed? Is that your position?
No, not necessarily. As I said, what I mean is that you can do an honest reading of Genesis.
Let's not be disingenuous then. Let's use our vocabulary a little bit better when we make assertions.
Well, if you're
like
gonna talk
that,
over
okay?
me, I guess I'll talk over you. But anyway, so what's going on?
It's
I never
misleading.
said that you couldn't read Genesis and get a very
okay. Both of you, if you guys don't not talk over each other, we're gonna have to break up the freaking clock. And I'm tired, and I don't want to have to run the damn clock. So
all right, we don't need the clock.
When people in their position yield and then shut the hell up for at least 30 seconds. Good gravy. Okay, good.
That's hard.
Okay, so who's talking first? Do you want to make your
why
point
is
against
dominate why does dominate imply violence? That doesn't make any sense. Even in Latin, the word dominus just simply means lord.
Well, yeah, that's what I mean. It means a place of authority to rule over. You can't really rule over plants, so to speak, right? It makes much more sense that this would be used in the larger context of the animal fauna going on.
So
further,
so we don't farm. We don't do farming. We don't do farming and planting, and we don't plant trees and crops and gardening. We don't rule over the plants too.
We don't cut them down at our choosing.
I guess make a good point there, I suppose. All right, I'll concede that much.
Can I jump in here real quickly?
Yeah,
my original question, how we got into this Genesis thing, my original question was, if you hold to an atheistic evolution view, there is no such thing as racism. Like, it's not evil. because they don't even have a morality to hold to unless it's a Christian morality.
Agreed. In pure naturalism, there's no standards. So in a theistic evolutionist view, you might try to argue, certain types of immorality or morality come from wherever, but in a purely naturalistic view, you don't have that anymore.
Well, hold on.
All you have is chemistry made all morality.
T-Rock, I'm going to agree with you, but I'm actually we are in agreement from our positional point, but I'm going to push back on what you said, and let me explain why. Because on a theistic evolutionary type paradigm, how do we know who exactly is human still?
What do you mean?
How do we know that? I mean, we still have the DNA of the oh gosh, we were just talking about it earlier. In fact, I think I found the article here about Neanderthal. I mean, we still have Neanderthal DNA, and because there was no literal Adam and Eve, no literal human line created in the image of God with a genealogy directly to Jesus, we don't have an explanation for sin. We don't have a savior. We don't have well, let me explain. So we don't even have a complete human lineage. For all we know, I am not bound by these laws because I'm not even human. It's possible, right? We might discover that tomorrow.
No, that's a fair point. I don't disagree with that at all.
We're not all sons of Adam. We're not all sons of Adam. We're not all bound by the curse. And there's no genealogy. There's no literal Adam, no literal Jesus. Go ahead.
And that's the thing. That's a very fatalistic way of looking at it, because you're defining humanity by the understanding of our genetics. That like in order to be human, you need to come from this so and so people. That's not how God, again, that's not how God says, because when God says when he made humans, when he made mankind, he made them in the image of God. It is that sapience, that spark of intelligence, that understanding, that the fact that humans are unique in the whole of creation is in and of itself proof of humanity.
Yeah, that's an eisegesis from the text. Okay,
no,
because
not
the Bible's,
at all. Because sorry, you first. Go ahead.
Hold on. The Bible's very clear that mankind, it's a special kind from the animal kind. If you even understand the creation event, that God created man after he created the animals. We are different. God created man specially and uniquely to have dominion over all of these things. God created Adam and Eve, put them in the garden. They sinned, they were cursed, and they were cast out of the garden. And one of the results of that was death. But if you reject a literal Adam and Eve with all of their descendants, which we can show scientifically, by the way, I can refute your argument if you want to go down that line. But from a purely biblical standpoint, God created Adam and Eve, and we are all descendants of them, and that's why we are all affected by the curse. But if you reject that, then I'm not related to Adam and Eve. At least I might not be.
So real quick then. Sam, your point's very valid, and that's kind of what I was getting at earlier. In pure naturalism, chemistry is the only explanation you have for the rise of intelligence and morality. Now, I'm not a naturalist, a pure naturalist like that, obviously, and I'm not a theistic evolutionist either. But in theistic evolution, you kind of have this gray line that you basically cannot define, and that is, when does the science of evolution end, and when does the I'll call it interference or whatever you want to, but when does God come back into the picture? Where exactly does that happen in the theistic time, in the theistic evolutionist timeline?
Well, I can answer that for you. The thing about it is, God never really is never really leaves his presence from his creation, as I said, because like this whole idea of violence and death, this was fundamental part to his creation. Okay, what death was, the death that was entered into the world was the death of man. It was human death, right? Like again, think of the Garden of Eden when the Satan tempted Eve. He said, "Surely you shall not die." Now, ultimately, he lied, because she did eventually die, right? That was the death that was entered in. Because when in God's plan, man had been created as something that would be immortal, to live and reign with him, as is intended now in the covenant of Jesus Christ.
So
When
real
we-
quick,
when we disobeyed God, what had happened is we introduced our own death.
so
into-
quick question. Quick question.
Go ahead.
I didn't quite get what you said earlier. Are you advocating for a literal Adam and Eve?
No, I'm not.
Well,
Right now, how to put it? I'm not decided on the issue right
So-
now.
so
Right
you've
now,
kinda made-
hold on. Let me explain. Right now, I would say that I am not for a literal Adam and Eve, but I'm not totally against the idea either.
Okay. So you kind of made my point. You have no idea where the dividing line is between
Not
the
necessarily,
end
because-
of science and evolution and the beginning of God and
T-Rock,
man.
don't say that
And
again.
and
please.
again, this
Don't
is the
say that.
same problem I'm talking about, because you're defining humanity by terms of how we're related to Adam, rather how the Bible defines us, that we have that we have the image of God, that we're made in the image of God. It's the image of God that makes humans human. It's not our relation to Adam or Eve. It is the fact that we are special creations of God.
What does that mean, image of God? Because I know there's different views on that. Do you hold that like we have the attributes of God, like free will, like wisdom or knowledge or reason? Is that how you hold it, or how do you hold that image of God?
So the image of God, or in Latin is the imago Dei, is the fact that yes, that we do have attributes of God in us, that we have creation, that we have this understanding of natural law, that there are things that are right and wrong that we know by nature alone, right? Or
No.
for instance, even Jackson would affirm that murder universally is seen as wrong, and we would attribute that to the natural law that God had written in us. The fact that the imago Dei in us, because we're made in the image of God, we have this fundamental knowledge of right and wrong, of moral law, and moreover, because of that, how should I say this? Because of that, we're able to share in some of the attributes of God, namely the creative force, right? So that's what means to be the imago Dei. What we understand as the sapience of man, that is unique among the whole of the animal and plant kingdoms.
So I got another question on that. So if it's the image of God is those attributes, would you say that babies in the womb are not human, or they do not have the image of God yet, just because they don't have anything except potential?
No, you see, that's a thing. Oh, I don't accept that infants in the room only have potential. I'd say they have active forces in them already too, and I think science actually science backs me up on that somewhat, because what we found that babies as early as 3 months in gestation can have dreams, right? So these aren't people with these aren't like these aren't potential people. They're people with potential.
So 1 second, I'm trying to understand. You're saying that by being in the creative force of God, right, or participating in it, that's how we get our image of God. Babies in the womb don't create anything, and they have no potential. They only have potential to create if they grow into a human, like adult or whatever, or a child that could create something. But in the womb, they're literally just developing.
Yeah, they don't have
Okay.
the,
Your
you can't say
point?
potential. You got to say status.
Yeah, so I used to hold to that kind of view, that it's like our attributes of our like mind and free will and moral stuff. But I see just a philosophical argument for the problem with that, is that it makes people that are in a coma, well, are they human? Because they have no creative, they just like a vegetable, right? Now, I know there's some stuff.
Well,
Go ahead.
so being made in the image of God, at Adam and Eve, and there are, I don't want to say the verdict's out, okay? So let's be honest. It's something that people still discuss, but Adam and Eve, Adam specifically was made in the image of God, in that he was sinless. He had not sinned, and his wife had not sinned either, but they were given one rule. And so when the literal Adam and Eve disobeyed God, that's what sin is. But Fro's position is going to muddy that water up. So sin is the disobedience of God. Adam and Eve,
I never
the
denied
literal
that.
Adam and Eve. Well, you what? You don't
I
deny
never
that?
denied that. Of course, sin is disobedience. I was very clear with that
Yeah.
from the outset.
But see, the
That
thing
disobedience
is
is
when
what introduced human death.
yeah. So that's Well, so there you go. So a literal Adam and Eve disobeyed God, and whether or not you want to say that it was death or human death, I want to know where you got those. Where'd you get those humans from? What are those on your evolutionary timeline? But then you have these genealogies from Adam, literal genealogies, and the reason why those genealogies have to be taken seriously is because Christ had to come from a specific line. And that genealogy from Adam down to that line of a literal, I mean, at what point does the fairy tale stop and the real genealogy begin?
I would say around the time of Abraham, but listen, the
But
fact
that's
of the matter,
arbitrary. You're not sinned either, but they were given one rule. And so when the literal Adam and Eve disobeyed God, that's what sin is. But Fro's position is going to muddy that water up. So sin is the disobedience of God. Adam and Eve,
I never
the
denied
literal
that.
Adam and Eve. You what? You don't
I
deny
never
that?
denied that. Of course, sin is disobedience. I was very clear with that
Yeah.
from the outset.
But see, the
That
thing
disobedience
is
is
when
what introduced human death.
yeah. So there you go. So a literal Adam and Eve disobeyed God, and whether or not you want to say that it was death or human death, I want to know where you got those. Where'd you get those humans from? What are those on your evolutionary timeline? But then you have these genealogies from Adam, literal genealogies, and the reason why those genealogies have to be taken seriously is because Christ had to come from a specific line. And that genealogy from Adam down to that line of a literal, I mean, at what point does the fairy tale stop and the real genealogy begin?
I would say around the time of Abraham, but listen, the
But
fact
that's
of the matter,
arbitrary. You're just making be disobeyed God, and whether or not you want to say that it was death or human death, I want to know where you got those. Where'd you get those humans from? What are those on your evolutionary timeline? But then you have these genealogies from Adam, literal genealogies, and the reason why those genealogies have to be taken seriously is because Christ had to come from a specific line. And that genealogy from Adam down to that line of a literal, I mean, at what point does the fairy tale stop and the real genealogy begin?
I would say around the time of Abraham, but listen, the
But
fact
that's
of the matter,
arbitrary. You're just making something up. You're just saying, well, I think it's
Sam,
here,
the
but
fact of the matter
who
is you're
knows?
thinking of black, you're looking at this black and white. Again, like it either is or isn't. It's either 1 or 0. But no, there are more options than just the ones you are giving me here.
You're not.
The
You're not.
reason-
under
No,
the
reason I'm
impression
not
that
to-
I'm just
Take
making this
turns,
up,
take
right?
turns.
Okay. The reason
ahead.
I'm not totally sold on the historical Adam and Eve is because the literature that they come up in, right? Genesis 1, 2, and honestly, you see these kind of things throughout the whole of the Torah. These things are clearly allegorical. They're clearly meant to be symbolic. And
Yeah, no, they're
so,
not. That's
and again,
arbitrary.
I mentioned this before. There's huge amounts of temple theology that shows up within these
arbitrary.
within these works, right? And so I'm of the opinion that, like, I'm not against a historical Adam and Eve, but at the same time, right, I find it hard to reckon a historical Adam and Eve with the very genre of Genesis.
So, Pro, what exactly do you consider the doctrine of kinsman redeemer to be?
Thank you.
How would I say? I probably am aware of what you're talking about, but under a different name. What's the doctrine of kinsman of the Redeemer?
The doctrine of kinsman redeemer means that Christ literally has to be related to every human on the planet, all the way back to Adam and Eve, in order for salvation to actually be meaningful.
There's a problem there, though. There's a problem there, though, because from our young Earth creationist view, every human, no matter what, would make him a kinsman redeemer. He could argue that the only reason that it would need to have a genealogy is because there's other humans that aren't related.
Right, and so the thing about it is, right,
But that's kind of the point,
No,
though.
I
Is
don't- no,
if you don't know where that split is, how can that argument have any merit whatsoever?
That would be a double-edged sword, Jamie, because without that, then you could never know. That's the problem. So you need a literal genealogy. You need everyone to be accountable to God, because everyone is related to Adam, and everyone needs to be able to have a kinsman redeemer. So everyone needs to be that's why you have to have this unbroken line.
Yeah, from Adam. I mean, I think it's
that
more
doesn't
about
work.
David, but I think.
And again, this is kind of the problem, because, like, understand, when Jesus came onto this earth, he had he didn't have an intention to save the whole world, to save the Gentiles. He came for his people, which were the Jews.
No.
The
Bible says,
that's in
the Bible
direct
says,
conflict
known
with
unto
the
God
word,
are all of his works from the foundation
For
of the
God
world.
so loved the what?
She's a Jew first.
First,
Then the Greek. And
Who's
it's
the new
a
wineskin?
here's the thing,
Who's the
Sam.
new
Right? Here's the thing.
wineskin?
Understand. That when the Gospels are being written, they're being written anachronistically. All of the time that has come through, all the history has already happened, and they're relating it back to you. So when Jesus begins his ministry, he has no intention of saving the Gentiles. He's come for his people. Hold on.
you just
Okay, I'll let
Okay,
you
go
finish,
ahead.
Sam. Thank you
go
for
ahead.
being quiet.
No, I'm sorry. You're right. You're right. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, so when Jesus came to this earth, right, and he started his ministry, he had no intention to save the Gentiles. It was only the Jews. But what happened? His own people were rejecting his message. So what did he do? He actually elucidated this in a parable that since his own family, his own kinsmen have rejected him, therefore maybe the people how do you say? Maybe the people on the highways, the whores, the common people, maybe they will accept me. And so that's the parable he announced, that nobody liked his message, nobody liked the kingdom of heaven. And so he now opened it to all people. So like the fact of the matter is, T-Rock, this idea of the fact that in order for Jesus to save everyone, they need to be genetically related to him. Jesus had no conception of that at the beginning of his ministry.
Yeah, so hold on.
Give me a second real quick.
Please,
Give me a second real quick.
Can I just I'm gonna die. Look, okay, hold on. And T-Rock, you can go, but I just want to say that Fro, you do not have an all-knowing God now. You've just destroyed that. You've removed that. You're saying
Okay.
that